Cameron Todd Willingham was found guilty and put to death for the arson murder of his 3 young children at the family home in Corsicana, Texas. The validity of the guilty verdict and the interpretation of the evidence used to convict Willingham of murder and arson have been the subject of intense debate since his execution in 2004. Willingham's family home was destroyed by fire on December 23, 1991. His 3 daughters, 2-year-old Amber Louise Willingham, and twins Carmen Diane and Cameron Marie Willingham, both 1-year-old, were killed in the fire. With only slight burns, Willingham himself managed to escape the house. At the time of the fire, Willingham's 3 children's mother, Stacy Quickendall, who was his then wife, was not at home. She was at a thrift store looking for Christmas gifts. Willingham was accused by the prosecution of trying to hide the abuse of his wife and children by setting the fire and killing the kids, but there was no proof of child abuse. Quickendall denied ever seeing him abusing the kids. Although she insisted he would never hurt their kids, she did say she was abused by him. "Our kids were spoiled rotten," she stated. According to the police investigation, a liquid accelerant of some kind was used to ignite the fire. The evidence included the discovery of char patterns in the form of puddles on the floor, the discovery of several fire origins, and the discovery that the fire had burned fast and hot, all of which were thought to hint to a fire that had been started with the aid of a liquid accelerant. The investigators also tested positive for a liquid accelerant at the front entrance and found charring beneath the aluminum front door jamb, which they thought was another sign of the accelerant. Stacy denied that they had been fighting before the night of the fire, and no motive was discovered. At that time, Johnny Webb, a jailhouse informant, provided testimony in addition to the arson evidence that was shown throughout the trial. For a number of reasons, his testimony has drawn criticism for being controversial. According to Webb, Willingham admitted that he started the fire to conceal the fact that his wife had injured or killed one of the girls. However, following the effects of the fire, none of the girls had any discernible physical injuries at the time of their deaths. Later, Webb admitted to the New Yorker reporter David Grant that he might have been wrong. He said that at that time he was receiving treatment for bipolar disorder and was prescribed numerous drugs. Webb provided an explanation during Willingham's trial for the distinct burns that were discovered on Amber's arm and forehead. Willingham admitted he claimed to burning her twice with a piece of wadded-up paper to give the impression that the kids were playing with fire. Although Webb was deemed untrustworthy, prosecutor John Jackson subsequently backed Webb's early release from prison. The motion to recant testimony that Webb later forwarded to Jackson stated that Mr. Willingham is innocent of all charges. The lawyers of Willingham were not informed. Later on, Webb took back his statement. He even went as far as asking, "The statute of limitations has run out of perjury, hasn't it?" Jackson and Webb repeatedly denied that Webb was given a lighter sentence in exchange for testifying against Willingham. Webb's testimony would have been nullified if there had been proof of such an agreement. The Innocence Project investigators claimed to have found a handwritten note in Webb's files that suggested such a transaction was in the works, according to a February 2014 New York Times story. A prosecutor said during the trial's sentencing phase that Willingham's tattoo of a skull and serpent matched the characteristics of a psychopath. The notion was validated by 2 medical professionals. One of those specialists, a psychologist with a master's degree in marital and family difficulties but no study on sociopathic behavior, was asked to analyze Willingham's Iron Maiden poster. According to him, an image of a fist piercing a skull represented death and violence. He went on to say that Willingham's poster of a fallen angel from Led Zeppelin was many times a sign of cultive-type activity. A man with Willingham's criminal background was an extremely severe sociopath who was incurable, according to psychiatrist James Grigson, the other medical expert. Grigson was dubbed Dr. Death because of his repeated expert witness evidence in which he advocated for the death penalty. Throughout the state of Texas, Grigson had testified as an expert witness for the prosecution in murder cases. Both the Texas Society of Psychiatric Physicians and the American Psychiatric Association removed him for unethical behavior before he passed away. According to the APA, Grigson had transgressed the organization's code of ethics. Willingham's actions during the fire and in the days after it were deemed suspicious by the prosecution. Willingham was forced out of his home through the front door as the fire spread, and he hunkered down close to the entryway. Willingham started yelling at neighbor Diane Barbie to dial 911, saying, "My babies are in there." Willingham was described as alternating between calm and distraught during his trial, at times yelling for help and at other times deliberately pulling his car away from the flames that were consuming his house. Willingham said that he took the car out of fear that it may blow up and make the home fire worse. Although the prosecution emphasized that there was no proof of smoke inhalation, witnesses reported that Willingham had singed hair on his chest, eyelids, and head and had a 2-inch burn injury on his right shoulder. Smoke had browned his hands and wrists. Eventually, he was handcuffed and taken to the hospital for treatment. Both Brandes Barbie and Diane Barbie begged Willingham to go back to the house to save his children, according to their sworn affidavits. Brandes Barbie said, "All I could see was smoke." She claims that he declined to enter the house to save his children, relocating his car away from the fire and then sitting on a neighboring grass, not once attempting to go inside to rescue his children. Willingham became so upset that emergency personnel had to detain him when the fire brigade arrived and the fire had reached flashover. Willingham and a few family members and friends returned to the house in the days that followed. According to the neighbors, the group had a peculiar sense of humor that seemed to darken when officials arrived. When Willingham and firefighter Ron Franks returned to the fire scene to retrieve personal belongings, Willingham was clearly disappointed to discover that he couldn't find a dart set. He ordered a replacement set at a nearby bar where the Willingham family was having a fundraiser, saying that money was not a problem now. According to the prosecution, Willingham might have been driven by a desire to get rid of undesired children. The prosecutor asserted that Willingham had tried to abort each of his wife's 2 pregnancies by kicking her to induce miscarriages, and that the fire that killed the children was his 3rd effort to murder them. Willingham was a serial physical and emotional abuser of his wife, according to the prosecutor. People unrelated to the case, however, present Willingham in a different light. He had never shown strange or sociopathic behavior, according to Polly Gooden, his former probation officer, who also claimed he was probably one of my favorite kids. Former Judge Bebe Bridges, who had imprisoned Willingham for stealing and was frequently on the opposite side of him in the judicial system, stated that she could not fathom him murdering his kids. She stated, "He seemed to care and was always respectful." On January 8, 1992, Willingham was charged with murder. He was offered a life sentence in return for a guilty plea during his August 1992 trial, but he refused, claiming he was innocent. Vasquez, the fire investigator, testified during the trial that the fire had 3 points of origin, indicating that it was intentionally set by human hands. Mineral spirits were detected in a sample of charred material near the house's doorway, suggesting the use of lighter fluid. Willingham had not been burned and had escaped the fire barefoot. This was interpreted as proof that the man poured the accelerant as he was leaving the house. The prosecution called a number of witnesses to testify. The trial's prosecutor, Jack Jackson, claimed in 2009 that Willingham's burns were so superficial as to suggest that the same were self-inflicted in an attempt to divert suspicion from himself. Nevertheless, Grant claimed that fire experts who looked into the issue informed him that Willingham's first-degree and second-degree burns were consistent with being in a fire before the moment of flashover, that is when everything in a room suddenly ignites. Regarding the state of the property, Jackson stated, "Any escape or rescue route from the burning house was blocked by a refrigerator, which had been pushed against the back door, requiring any person attempting an escape to run through the conflagration at the front of the house." The Willingham residence had 2 refrigerators. Grant was informed by police investigator Jimmy Hensley and Assistant Fire Chief Douglas Fogg, who both looked into the fire, that they had never thought the refrigerator was involved in the arson conspiracy. Jackson refuted Willingham's story by asserting that Willingham had not inhaled any smoke, according to blood gas tests conducted at Navarro Regional Hospital soon after the incident. Rescue attempts were described in detail in Willingham's statement and eyewitness reports. According to Jackson, Willingham was given the chance to exonerate himself as a suspect through a polygraph test, which he declined, in accordance with standard Navarro County death penalty procedures. He refused the life sentence in exchange for his guilty plea, defying the counsel of his own attorneys. He maintained that even if it meant saving his life, he would not confess to something he had not done. Willingham did not testify during his trial. The defense only summoned one witness, the babysitter for the Willinghams, who said she didn't think Willingham could have killed his kids. Willingham spent his time on death row, first in the Ellis unit and then in the Polunsky unit. Stacy Quickendall, Willingham's wife, was granted a divorce in 1993. The Chicago Tribune's Steve Mills and Maurice Posley's article about subpar investigative techniques in December 2004 brought attention to Willingham's case. According to Grant's 2009 investigative report, which drew from the research of arson investigation specialists and the advancements in fire science since the 1992 probe, the evidence for arson was not compelling. He argued that Willingham's acquittal would have been justified if this information had been known at the time of the trial. Willingham spent years attempting to reverse his conviction and insisted on his innocence until his death. On February 17, 2004, he was put to death by lethal injection at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. Michelle Lyons, an American crime reporter, author, and public information director for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, who witnessed Willingham's execution as well as nearly 300 others in Texas, claims that Willingham's final remarks were so scandalous and directed at his ex-wife Stacy and the witnesses that the prison warden initiated the execution to silence him. Willingham responded by giving the middle finger just before he passed away. At 6:20 p.m., 7 minutes after the fatal dosage started to enter Willingham's veins, he was declared dead. He was only 36 years old. Following his execution, his parents had him cremated and his ashes discreetly placed on his children's graves at Oakwood Cemetery. In Rollins Cemetery, Willingham has a gravestone just to commemorate him. The legitimacy of the forensic evidence used in Willingham's conviction had been questioned repeatedly since his execution. Specifically, it has been questioned whether it can be demonstrated that an accelerant was used to start the deadly fire. Gerald Hurst, a fire investigator, went over the case files, which included the transcriptions of the trial and an hour-long movie of the fire scene's aftermath. There is nothing to suggest to any reasonable arson investigator that this was an arson fire, Hurst stated in December 2004. This was only a fire. The state of Texas mandated a re-examination of the case in June 2009. Dr. Craig Baylor, who was hired by the Texas Forensic Science Commission to investigate the case, said in August 2009, 5 years after Willingham's execution and 18 years after the fire, that a finding of arson could not be sustained. A fire marshal's crucial testimony during Willingham's trial, according to Baylor, was hardly consistent with a scientific mindset and is more characteristic of mystics and psychics. What do you guys think? Was Cameron Todd Willingham innocent and wrongfully executed? I am not sure what to believe. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.